The church should be a place of refuge, but for many, it's been a place of deep pain.
I had one woman report he was one of the teachers there, and he was also a leader in the church.
In this episode, Dr. Andrew Bauman unpacks the hard truths about sexism, abuse, and power dynamics within church culture. Level up as a man by subscribing to the Man Within podcast channel now.
Dr. Bauman, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
You were Andrew Bauman last time we had you on. Now you're Dr. Bauman. Congratulations.
Hey, the tortoise won out. Only took me 10 years, but I finally got it done. So
that's not bad, dude. But you did your PhD while you had like a full-on practice. You have a family. I mean, that's an accomplishment.
We were doing it all at once. My wife was in her doctorate, so we were literally just taking like a class at a time and trying to pay for it. But we did it. Were you racing each other to see like who could get their PhD first?
No,
she won. I gave
up. Okay. Fair enough. So you guys both have your PhDs now.
There we go. We got it done. Yes.
And what was your PhD in?
So I ended up doing a doctorate of education. So a doctorate of education in my new book, Safe Church, was actually part of my dissertation. So I studied women's experience of sexism and abuse in the Protestant church. And then I turned it in, since, about 2 people will ever read that dissertation. I turned it into a readable, and then expanded the research into 2,800 women and their experience in the church.
Very interesting. Okay, got it. And then was your wife's PhD in a similar vein?
So yeah, hers was on spiritual and emotional health of women.
It sounds like from your standpoint, women were the focus because they're going to give you the best indicator of what's going on in the local church.
There you go. Well, I didn't want kind of the stats from the positions of power. I used to be a pastor before I was a therapist, and I feel like I kind of know what my experience and my buddies that I worked with. And I wanted to know kind of from people who maybe's voice were not heard and were not as prominent, to see what I could learn to continue to become a better man.
What'd you find out?
A ton. And it wasn't, I started out by reading in 2018 a study from Silicon Valley called The Elephant in the Valley. And it was a study of women in the tech industry and their experience of sexism. And that got me thinking, well, what would it be like for another male-dominated space, the church, as 87% of churches are led by men? I wonder what women's experiences are. And so that's kind of where it started, the thought. And I'd actually started a different dissertation, kind of canned that, and went with this one. And then the idea, basically it was horrific. It was way worse than I kind of thought in my head. But of course, I'm not a woman. And so I haven't been experiencing what it means to be objectified, what it means to be silenced. But a few of the big stats that came out of my research are 82%. And we're talking about over 2,800 women. 82% believed that sexism played a role in their church. Right? What is sexism? Sexism is prejudice, discrimination, or stereotyping because of someone's sex. And there's different types of sexism. We won't go all into that. But 82% felt like, okay, this is my experience. And so I just heard so many stories, right, from so many women. And these are women that worked in the church. So 16% had worked. 16% had worked 25 years or longer.
Whoa.
I know. And then another 25% had worked 16 years or longer. So these are women who've been in the church working hard. And we've just story after story of, I think of Hannah. She worked on church staff, and she remembers walking up and heard the other leaders joking about how to increase church attendance, as if they made the baptisms, the women wear wet T-shirts. Right. Yeah. And so that's, stuff like that. Like, what do you think Hannah, and I use pseudonyms just to hide their anonymity, but what do you think she felt about her body? What do you think she felt about her own breasts, her own worth, her own, as mockery, right? And so that goes into the next one of 62% of women said they would not be surprised if they heard a sexist joke in their church, right? And so these so-called jokes by men in power are normalized. and which just increases the occurrence, right? And it increases the tolerance of discrimination, lowers women's worth.
A question about that. So the tech study that you mentioned that kind of inspired this, the tech and the church have the thing in common, which is that male dominated at a leadership level. But I think the church would be different in the sense that most patrons at a church are women, right?
More so, yeah. The people the congregants, it ends up being like 60-40 or something like that.
And I guess that's why interviewing women that are, you said, involved in churches, are they on their staff like paid employees or volunteers as well?
So these are paid. These are paid staff positions and volunteers. So
volunteers.
We did both. Yep.
So they would represent a larger contingent that just is showing up to a church on a Sunday morning. Was that the reason for the focus there?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And just wanting to know their experience. And so that some of the other statistics. This one's probably the worst. But it ended up being 35.1% of women reported suffering from sexual harassment or some form of sexual misconduct while their time in ministry.
Or they presumably from somebody on staff with them?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Or or just somebody in the church. It didn't specify. Or they answered it was complicated. So there's a story there, right? So but it's over 1 in 3 women. Right. So is the church safe for women? Right. And so from this study, it's not. And it's horrific because I obviously love the church. I was an orphan growing up and the church took me in. Right. But there's so many stories. And I really highlight tons of stories in this book because I wanted the woman's voice to be central of, hey, what can we learn? How can we, in a sense, lay down our power, not so women power over us, but so there's a shared power, right? So there's a shared power, which I believe represents God more fully.
Why is the church in this state? Do you think it's always been like this? Are there more relevant reasons for it?
Well, I mean, again, there's so many different angles. It depends kind of how deep in the rabbit hole we want to go down.
I don't mind going a little down the rabbit hole. You can take me away.
I tend because of my work on pornography and my own 13-year addiction. There's a big part that pornography plays a role. Obviously, some of the stats they're wide variety, but I always just refer back to the kind of classic 2014 Barna study saying 50% of evangelical pastors have some type of relationship with pornography. So what happens if they internalize their shame, right? What is that going to do? If they're not going to make peace with that and wrestle with their shame, they're going to project all sorts of stuff on women around them. So they're going to teach a lot about modesty. They're going to, in a sense, I want to get rid of this shame. I'm going to leave the door open and not meet with women one-on-one because they may want to jump me, which is never the case. It's actually the case that they've developed a pornographic mindset and what I believe is a pornographic style of relating that is actually dangerous. And so they want to project the sense of safety, and they don't want, they want to get all this shame out of them without actually dealing with the shame. Without
a reference to that's the Billy Graham rule. Is that what you're referencing?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And so, obviously that's one angle. Another angle is a lot of the biblical text that we take some of this, we believe that it's gospel truth. So I'm talking of a couple of scripture verses that have been really weaponized against women and used as misogyny and fodder to oppress and harm. So I'm thinking of 1 Corinthians 14:34. Women should be silent in churches, for they're not permitted to speak, but are to submit themselves. They need to learn. They need to go home, ask their husbands. And then also 1 Timothy 2:11. These are kind of the big clobber verses. A woman should learn quietly, full submission. Do not allow a woman to teach or have authority over a man. Instead, she's to remain quiet. So if you just read those, women need to be quiet, right? Like women need to submit to authority. And so just like face value, you read that text and you think, okay, this is what God means. Versus actually dissecting these verses, going back to the original Greek. Well, what is this? What is really going on? Can I study the Roman patriarchal culture and the Greek culture that Jesus is in and that Paul is in and actually begin to connect some dots? And so that's one whole chapter 6 of my book, but we'll just dive into a couple of the the big kind of takeaways from these verses. When you look at First Timothy, the word, be quiet is hashua, which actually means stillness. Women, be still. Oh, doesn't that change the entire meaning of the text? Women, be still within yourselves. And I like to think of it as, because the Roman culture was so patriarchal, the early church was so pro-women. I mean, huge. When you look at so much of what Paul did about calling them co-laborers, co-workers, and basically women were so empowered in the early church that they started disrupting some services, right? They were talking because they were so empowered, is the way I like to think of it. But hashua does not mean quieting all women of all time. It actually means being still within your bodies, right? When you go to the word authority, which, I read that, I do not permit a woman to have authority over a man. It means authoritian, which is a loose translation of the Greek word. And the origin is actually abusing one's power or misusing authority. So it actually means, woman, do not abuse your authority over a man or misuse your authority over a man. So it actually is saying, no, woman, you have authority, right? So we're talking about really poorly interpreted texts that then are weaponized. I mean, I've literally had a client come into my office in a couples session. This is maybe my first year as a therapist, 13 years ago. And his wife was describing him praying over her these verses about submission so that she would submit to his dark sexual fantasies. And I'll hold you from the graphic detail of what those were. But this is what we're talking about, where you literally weaponize verses that you don't actually understand, that you actually have a poor translation to, right? And then you take that and you preach it from the pulpit, or your unconscious pornographic mindset then increases the misogyny of this, and you weaponize it, and you literally end up harming a generation of women. So what I argue in the book is we have to, if we're going to understand these biblical texts, we have to use consistency when we interpret the text, right? So if you're going to silence women in First Timothy and think that's correct, then it actually contradicts in a myriad of other passages, right? Luke 24:9. John 4:39, Judges 5:7, Exodus 15:20, Esther 7:3, like Luke 1:46. Like, we have to realize we have to interpret correctly and use the same all the way through, because Paul continuously talks about partnering with women in Acts and Romans. Priscilla was outstanding among the apostles, Romans 16:7, right? Philip had 4 daughters who prophesied. Phoebe was a deacon in Romans 16:1. Juno was described as outstanding among the apostles. Like, you've got to realize this is actually a wild thing that Paul and some of the early church apostles are pushing against this huge culture, and they're revolutionizing the world, right? And then when we look at Acts 2:18, I will pour out my spirit, men and women will prophesy, right? Or Galatians 3:28, there's no Greek or Jew, no slave or free, male or female. We are one in Christ. And so we have to realize there's no hierarchy in Christ. There's no hierarchy. Christ evens the playing field, right? And so what we've done is we've actually used scripture to justify evil of objectifying and harming women. And that's made us as men more sick, because we become limited to no longer the image bearer of God, but actually just a consumer and an objectifier. And it actually obviously harms women, the victim of our abuse. Right?
How much, I mean, you and I were both pastors in previous lives. How much of this is on, like, how much of your message would you love to get into the ears of pastors? Because I know for me, I often get asked when I interview about local churches, like why I think the stat is 7%, right? Or I think in the last round, it was a little bit higher. It's like 10% now have something for people struggling with porn. And my big thing is, pastors are shepherds. They're shepherds to a flock. And there's pastors, there's, financial health and relational well-being. And there's all these different areas of the pastor that they lead their flock through. And there's a little part called sexual integrity
Yes.
that they can't leave their flock there because they don't have access to it themselves. They don't
Yes.
have the right mindset. They haven't maybe gone through their own healing. They haven't dealt with the shame like you were talking about.
Yes.
How important is this for the conversation? Your book's titled Safe Church. So I
Yes.
have to imagine, you're envisioning a local church that's doing this properly, godly sexuality.
Correct.
What role should the pastors play in all of this?
Well, it's huge. You can't, as a pastor, you can't take your church further than you've gone yourself.
Right. There it is. Yeah.
Right. So how can you, teach a healthy, liberated theology that's not inundated with patriarchy, misogyny, and all these undertones of oppression towards women if you haven't done that work yourself? All right. We can use the big scary word of deconstructing, whatever. It's like we've got to unlearn, call it whatever you want. You just have to unlearn some of this stuff so you can actually rebuild a more healthy model that actually says, no, I'm an image bearer of God, and feminine, you are the image bearer of God. And objectification and honor of the Imago Dei don't go together. I can't masturbate and objectify an image bearer of God, and then somehow it doesn't go together. One is literally ripping the face of God out of an image bearer, right? The objectification destroys. And so, yeah, so it's huge. It's huge. Now, will pastors pick up this book? That's yet to be seen. What I'm finding is that there's a lot of women that are picking up the book that don't feel alone anymore, that don't feel gaslit. Story after story. I went to my pastor. I went to my elder board. My husband was abusing me, right? He was looking at porn, lying to me. And you told me to go have more sex with him. You told me to cook him a better meal. It's just like disgusting. We're actually enabling abusers, enabling porn addicts, and blaming it on the victims.
Yeah.
It's insane.
And I think you're right that the perpetrators, like often when this bad advice is spewing out or whatever, it's because they're covering something up that's usually going on in their own life. I mean, talk about rabbit holes. This is almost embarrassing to admit, but I got down the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky rabbit hole the other day. I forget how it popped up. And this one article at the end, it had listed everybody that was in the Senate, in office, even involved in some of the court proceedings around the case, who also had affairs or were having affairs at the time of the proceedings. And I mean, it was not a short list. Like there was probably at least 10 people on that list.
I believe it.
And it got me wondering just how often this is going on,
Yes.
And I know even the local church we're a part of now, we've been there for a few years. Very early on, when we started attending, we really liked the preaching. The pastor is just amazing there, and he teaches almost every week. And he started his message. He said, "Today I'm going to talk to you about XYZ. And then I have something to talk about. I have something to mention at the end." And I thought, "Oh boy, here we go." You've kind of once you've been in church enough, you kind of know what that means, right?
Oh yeah.
And unfortunately, there was a moral failure with one of the pastors on staff, and in talking with, again, we were new to the church. We didn't know him super well, but just talking to other people that we did know well. And they said, man, he's the last person you'd expect because he was so strong about morality, right? And the lines and where they are. And I guess where I'm going with this is how do you, especially you, like with the knowledge you have, the years of freedom you have, how do you channel your passion and the standards that we know exist while also not having that rigidity that sometimes can come with or that can just come across too strongly, and maybe it pushes people away or it's evidence that you're actually hiding something. Like, what does this actually look like when we're upholding God's standards while also still having, compassion and empathy for believers?
Right. Well, to me, that's where the core healing work comes in. So I believe we eroticize and sexualize our wounds as a way to try to heal our wounds and make sense of our wounds. So you've got to deal, not just talk about 10 steps how to stop looking at porn. You've got to actually do the core work to heal what we call your wounded child. Like, what does that actually mean to go in there and heal and do that work? And in that, you no longer have to do these projections or wear these masks. You actually get to make peace with what you most fear. You get to make peace with your death. We call it, you have to face crucifixion before you taste resurrection. So that's the work. And so many programs, so many things is just about, right, behavior management and buying, getting good porn blockers. And it's just like you're just putting literally crutches. And if you're still walking with crutches, after a few years, I think you need to get a different leg. Like something's going on, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we actually, it's in liberation that you find more freedom. But it's scary. It's scary to take that step and to enter your crucifixion.
Give an example of eroticizing emotions or pain or woundedness.
Yeah. So, we'll say Joe, we'll call him Joe. Joe comes into my office and basically talks about, we'll start with what type of porn do you use? What's your darkest sexual fantasy? We'll go there.
The light stuff.
Just the little baby stuff. And then, he'll go in there. Obviously, if he feels shame or I don't really care. It's not, this is like second hat to me. I've been doing this for so long. I'm not interested in shaming you. It's tell me so we can quickly get to the why.
Let's not waste time here.
The why, right? So then he'll talk about the type of porn he uses. So, it'll be very intimate, a lot of eye contact. I don't like the pro stuff. I want the amateur stuff. I want this. I want, whatever. I'll go into detail. And then we begin to, okay, now tell me about the last time you looked at porn. Okay. Tell me what the scene was. Tell me what the scene is. And then I'll say, now let's strip all the eroticism out of the scene. What is left? What's in the scene? And then he'll describe what the scene is. It's a man, it's a woman. They're looking at each other. Bingo, connection. Okay. He's looking for intimacy. So these common themes begin to pop up for me. And then when you look at the not professional airbrush stuff, okay, he wants authentic engagement, right? He doesn't want it fake. Okay, so that's another clue. So all these clues as he's describing this to me, and then we take those general themes and then we bring it back down. Okay, tell me your story of connection. Tell me how you were not attuned to, who did not see you, and then we go into their story. And quickly you'll see the connection between the type of porn that they use or their dark sexual fantasies or their masturbatory fantasies and their woundedness. So instead of talking about all that other stuff, we can quickly get to the heart of the why. Now, how do we tend to that wounded little boy? How do we tend to who's hurting, who feels like nobody saw him, nobody loved him? So now they're eroticizing and seeking out intimacy and connection through a false sense, right? It's never actually going to heal their wounds. And so slowly we begin to do that work where they no longer need porn, where they outgrow it, and they no longer see any need for it because it does not actually work. And once you taste genuine intimacy and goodness, you never want anything else, right? So this is why we do, we 6 inches from our face staring at each other's eyes for most of our retreats. And that's our co-ed retreats and our men's retreats, where we're constantly engaging intimacy because we don't know how to do intimacy. We don't know how to do it well.
Why do we eroticize those, I guess, non-erotic elements like connection and intimacy? Why? And is this exclusive to males? Does it look different for women? Do they eroticize but differently? Is it the same kind of thing?
Yeah, no. We all do it. I think the simplest answer is that it's easy. It's easy. Simple. I feel bad. I feel pain. I don't want to feel pain. Give me something good to eat, right? Give me something quick. Oh, orgasm. Up, penis. Up, right hand. Oh, like simple. Fantasy. Simple, right? So that's different. And now it's, you don't need to pay for it. It's free. It's like up, my phone's in my hand, in my pocket. It's just like simple. I can inoculate. I can pacify. Quick, easy, simple. And what we're inviting people into is actually your healing begins with your death, begins with your crucifixion, pain, heartache. Oh yeah, and you have to pay me tons of money to come to see me. Like it sucks, right? Like it's who would want to do that? And yet every month, we have men from all over the world come and want to do this work because they're hungry to be men of integrity and men of courage. And I'm sure you see it in your practice as well. Men are hungry, but they don't know how because we've given them such crappy tools to engage their pain and to actually be liberated.
Well, and we're not giving people healing experiences. I think that's what's so powerful about what you do and why you guys are so good at what you do. Obviously, you've been doing it for a long time, but just for people to, I mean, in your case, you guys are doing retreats and that kind of thing, right? So people are getting out of their environment and then they're getting to experience these things. You're not just doing a lecture and saying, hey, here's what intimacy is. You're giving them, raw, authentic interactions, and some raw materials that they can use to actually reconstruct what it means to experience intimacy.
Yes.
What does the body play in all of this? Because I think we could have this conversation and actually make it very cerebral and kind of cognitive, but we know the body keeps the score, and I know that's a huge part of what you and your wife do on these retreats as well. How does that play into guys reprocessing and reconstructing some of these things?
So we gave up just talk therapy kind of a long time ago because we saw the limitations of it and realized
what were the limitations?
Shallow healing. It wasn't getting to the core of who we are. It was, again, back to management. And again, story work is fabulous and has to be done, right? That's just what I just described, kind of sharing your story and grieving. But it can't just stay in our head. So how this is personal to me is, I did kind of story work forever, training, and that's kind of how I started my private practice. But then and then my own therapy. And then I realized, wait a minute, part of my shadow is that I'm very good at articulating. So I would find myself in the therapist's office out talking them or articulating because I, went to grad school or whatever, articulating some psychological dynamic that I was doing and not feeling a thing. Right. I wasn't, feeling, but I was articulating, and then they were very impressed that I was smart or that I could articulate something.
Yeah.
I'm like,
worst place to be as a client.
I want to be challenged. I want to be pushed. So I began training with this. It was a non-Christian place, which I needed to get out of my comfort zone. But it was just this, place in Ashland, Oregon, where we started, went to train into this guy. And it was some of the weirdest stuff I've ever done. And he started off his sessions. This was like my first group. And then I went out and did co-ed groups. But the session would be, what did you dream last night? I'm like, oh gosh, this is weird, but like, that's how we started. And then it ended up getting, and before I knew it, I'm, 8 men are holding me down and I'm screaming as the therapist is digging into my belly, and talking to my son, who I lost 13 years ago. I lost my son, and it was just some of the deepest work I'd ever done, and be like, what is this stuff that I'm doing? And then I couldn't get enough of it. And then so I just kept going and doing more professional trainings and more retreats. And then now,
can you talk us through that moment a little bit more? I'm getting a visual, but what was that? So these guys have you pinned down because the anger, the grief is coming out. Is that
all the above. I needed to feel it in my body, right? I needed to feel the anger. I need to feel the grief. I need to feel everything. And part of the restraints, and we do this all the time now in our groups, but we restrain guys all the time. We literally will tackle guys. We do full body stuff, but it's all for a therapeutic purpose. Obviously, our number one rules are we're not going to hurt you or we're not going to hurt each other. Sometimes that's, we have started signing waivers after we've had a lot of blood and stuff, but it was like, oh gosh, you gotta cover myself here. But anyway,
yourself there. Yeah,
exactly. But like the realization is our body has to be engaged here. I can't just tell the story. I have to feel the story. For me to feel the story, I have to get into my body. And so, clients all the time will talk about horrific sexual abuse, right? So we have to go into the sexual abuse, not just tell it, actually feel it. So we'll close our eyes and do a visualization of the scene. We'll go on to the bed. We'll go lie on the bed. We'll go literally enter into the scene to re-experience it. And it's a fine line. I don't say anyone needs to do this. I'm a skilled surgeon. right? Like you have to have skill to do this
Yeah.
type of surgery
Yes.
because you can re-traumatize. And we obviously aren't interested in re-traumatizing. And so you can't change the facts of your trauma, but you can change the meaning that the trauma holds because unprocessed trauma is always reenacted. So if we're going to keep reenacting our traumas, then we'll have, right, terrible marriage. We'll continue to harm the people we love. And so we have to go back into these stories and we have to go and heal the wounds and recreate new meaning. So we'll go into the scene, either physically restrain them all with their consent, their permission, and then we'll begin to reenact the scene, and then we'll begin to bring their voice back. Because as a child or as whatever, they lost voice, they lost power. And so then we'll say, okay, take your power back. Okay, throw them off of you. Say no. Even just practice the word no from your gut, right? No, no, right? And then just feel it. And then, okay, now rip their restraints off. And so I've had literally men will throw 8 guys off of them like butter and stand up and just begin to feel their power in a new way. And it begins to recreate that new meaning and changes the brain. So you're not actually stuck on the trauma because now you have a different story where you were empowered. Again, we can't change the facts, but we can change the meaning that the trauma holds. So that's just a little window into some of our trauma work.
That's so powerful, man. I think this is where I love the book, The Body Keeps the Score, but I do think we kind of missed the mark a bit. Like we understood like, okay, the body keeps the score and let's keep talking about our problems. And the solution side of it is very rarely this somatic. So that's really interesting to hear. What's the ratio of somebody can come to a retreat, get an experience like this that is life-changing, years of trauma gets processed and released? What's the ratio of you have this experience versus the element of the management and the self-care that happens after the retreat and continuing that momentum? Have you guys figured that out? I mean, obviously you're focused on the retreats. I get that, but
it's a very non-scientific, approach, but kind of what I've seen is we'll have probably 60% of guys change their lives forever and do just holy work. 20% have a really good experience and slowly get back into their old way of being.
Okay.
And just kind of go back to managing, and slowly the entitlement slips back in, and that negative thinking of, oh, it's probably my wife's fault, or, that kind of stuff. And they don't do the follow-up program that we have of, our weekly online groups and our,
okay, I got it. So you guys have a follow-up program after the retreat?
Yeah. I have coaching in our coaching team, and, I have everything there to help. And then the other 20% are like, oh crap, you want me to die. You want me to feel pain, and I'm not interested in that. And then I just say, no refunds. See you later.
Yeah.
So it's up to the people. How do you want to get well or not? I mean, Jesus asked the question at the pool of Bethesda, do you want to get well? Like, getting well hurts.
Yeah.
Getting well costs you something. And if it doesn't, you're not doing the work.
Yeah. It's sort of the great irony that in a pleasure-centric addiction like pornography or sex or, whatever, that to actually heal from something so pleasureful, you need to die and experience incredible pain.
Exactly.
Yeah. What changes in these, like I'm thinking of the context of safe sex, sorry, not safe sex, but also very important, but Safe Church, your book, Safe Church. I'm thinking about the context of that, of, healthier views towards sexuality, certainly healthier views towards women, and creating, or making the local church an environment where men and women alike can feel safe.
Yes.
How do these experiences tie into that? How would somebody have a really transformative, somatic, deep healing story work experience with you on a weekend retreat?
Right.
What does that mean for them in the way they view women and the way they view others and the way they're relating with other people?
Well, the goal is that it changes everything, right? The goal is that it actually changes the core of you, so you begin to live differently. So if unconscious trauma is always reenacted, we make peace with that, and it comes to the conscious, it actually impacts the way you live. So it's going to impact the way you see women. It's going to impact the way, how vulnerable you are and how you engage. It's going to impact how you view theology, and right? Because out of problematic theology comes problematic. I mean, out of some bad interpretations of Scripture come problematic theologies and teachings that subjugate, harm women, right? And so it's like everything begins to impact how you live, and that's the goal. We're not just trying to have some summer camp experience. We're trying to actually live differently, right? And begin to take ownership of our shadow and the parts of us that we don't want to see, and actually, without self-contempt, without shame, toxic shame, but a healthy shame of actually just owning our guilt, owning what we've done so we can move beyond it.
This is reminding me of some of Sheila Ray Gregoire's work, which I know you've collaborated with her on a couple things, and it makes perfect sense given your recent work, especially. And I know she was talking about how there was the contingent in her initial survey of women who reported very high rates of marital satisfaction. They said, "Yeah, our marriages are great," but then when you looked at all the subsequent questions, like, "Do you feel validated? Do you feel like you have a voice?" All that stuff ranking very, very low. Did you observe anything like that in the data of like maybe women who knew the right things to say, but when you looked a little bit deeper, you could tell like they were experiencing the objectification and the sexualization and all those other dynamics?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I think when I think about some of the failures of the study, I think, it was majority white women. I'd love to hear some more ethnically diverse groups. I'm not like an academic researcher. I'm a practitioner. And so it's just like, it's a fairly elementary study. So I would love to see somebody take this and go on, and do a lot more things with it. But yeah, we've got, average of ethnicity, most of them had 43% had some graduate school experience. So mostly we're highly educated,
Right.
and the denominations range from all over. But yeah, as far as that, I don't think we got enough data to really know what did they understand what they were answering fully or not? It was more just kind of a general, hey, I want to get a idea.
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense.
What's going
So
on?
if 10 years from now, if the message of your book of Safe Church really got out, it blows up, every local church pastor, male or female, is reading it.
Sure.
What are you envisioning? What would the local church look like if this message actually got embodied?
Yeah. That would be a beautiful thing. I think beginning to take the experience of women seriously, beginning to take our own internal worlds seriously, pastors realizing that they lead out of their core. And so what inner work are you going to do to heal some of those young adolescent parts of you that could cause a lot of harm? What about our blind spots of how we treat women? Like, that would just be awesome. But then we're going to see churches not being scared to have hard conversations, right? To realize to use trusted resources instead of a lot of the resources out there just are terrible, that are actually perpetrating more harm and abuse, right? They're going to start yearly prevention training, abuse prevention, background checks for the people in there that are working there. They're going to create, actually policies and reporting procedures so that women can have safe places to go, right? They're going to have open dialogue sessions with their congregants to start talking about issues of abuse and sexism. Like, let's start talking about it. One of the biggest feedbacks that I heard from women said, if I just had somebody there that was like me, all they wanted was representation. If there was just one or two women there that would have been there. I had one woman report how she was raped by it was like a Christian school environment, and he was one of the teachers there, and he was also a leader in the church. And so she went to the pastor, and he basically made it about her and how she was seducing him and taking, the harlot who was destroying this guy's marriage. Right. And it was just like, this is a teenage girl who's being sexually abused. And she's like, and then the pastor's wife joined for one meeting or something, and he kept calling it sex. And then the woman said, well, I was actually rape. Like, it's not like she just had one woman kind of, the pastor's wife there, actually name it for what it was. And it was just like, like how many times have men's shadow parts of them or their own, sexual addiction that has not been processed, then used to harm and enable further abuse and sexualization of women. So that's my hope, is that we could create safer churches and safer places.
So in that example, what would the safe church version of that be? So the teenage girl comes and reports this to the pastor, and then what does it look like from there if in a prototypical situation?
Yeah, in a healthy situation, right, it's reported to the authorities. What we saw in our study was so many churches wanted to protect the institution. Oh, this is going to make us look bad. Oh, Joe Schmo, who's the janitor or whatever. Yeah, he's a predator, and we don't know how many people he's hurt. But let's just let him go and just not talk about it. Let's sweep it under the rug.
Be quiet about it.
Just be quiet about it, and he's not going to be back here, so we're good. Okay, Joe Schmo's going to go work for the other church down the road as a janitor, right? It's just like we're not actually dealing with it. We're just creating an environment that perpetrates abuse and just passes it on. And so many people are like, well, if it's not in my church, then we're good. So let somebody else deal with it. What if we begin to confront abuse head on? So another story that I'm thinking of is Rebecca. We'll call her Rebecca. She's a teenage girl, and she remembers, and she says, my parents would make me wear a modesty swimsuit. So think of it like, full neck, full body, modesty. Okay. And so she said, one of her father's friends commented, he was so glad that he could come to the lake and not worry about lust. And he told her dad how thankful he was. And then she was applauded. Thank you for protecting your brothers in Christ. His mindset, right? We, in a sense, brush over that as normal. Versus, do you realize that your father's friend just admitted that he's a potential pedophile, that he sexualizes young teenage girls? Right. And you're cool with that. We want to make it about modesty rather than we've got a problem here. And what would it mean for the father to confront his friend and no longer be a bystander to sexism and abuse? That's what a healthy father would do. Hey, I don't appreciate you sexualizing my kids and my girls, and they're going to wear whatever they want because it's not actually about, they could literally be butt naked right now. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's about your integrity. It's about what you do with their beauty. Because look at sexual abuse statistics in, fully veiled women. It actually doesn't change because it's not about that. It's actually about our mindset and our integrity. And if we don't deal with us, but that means men confronting other men, and there's a bro code, right? There's no, it's locker room talk. It's normal. And I say BS to that. No, it's not. We've made it normal because we're actually a part of the problem.
What about, now that you're talking about the bro code, I'm like, so many examples come to my mind. So let's use this story you gave as an example, the first one. So the teenage girl, she comes and reports that, she's been raped, and this guy's a teacher at the Christian school. He's also a leader at the church. Let's say instead of it being a teenager, let's say it's just it's a woman. So there's not a legal component. There's not the pedophile conversation that's off the table, but it's just sexual misbehavior. And it's inappropriate. Course of action there. What does that look like in a again, the prototype that we're kind of talking about, where legalities aren't involved?
So in that, you have two consenting adults, right? But here's the problem and why it's still abuse. They're not equal in power. So if you want to know if sexual abuse is a thing, you have to look at power dynamics. So who has the power in the relationship? Pastor, elders, right? Teacher, and then spiritual abuse is one of the most insidious, because whatever I say, I represent God. So if I have an unaddressed shadow in me around sexuality and I represent God, and I've seen this on the front lines. It's disgusting and disturbing, right? Whatever you do it's like the voice of God telling you to do, right? And so it's dangerous and it's horrific. And so it has to be addressed. Yeah, maybe there's not, law implications or police implications, but that man has to be let go. That man has to be reported. It has to be like, this is not okay. Wife, what, like, it has to be known to the community. Hey, this is what's going on. And here's something that can help. Here's, helpful things. We can get you help because we care about you. But we are not going to sweep it under the rug, and you're not just going to, come back next week and I'm forgiven, right? Or which I've seen thousands and thousands of men. It's so gross where they weaponize forgiveness, where they literally will abuse thousands of people and go start another church. And I'm literally sitting with the clients that they've abused, and they know there's not repentance. They know there's not humility. But what it is I don't know how else. All I am is a pastor. I don't know how to do anything else. So in a sense, it's a cheap grace, and it's gross. And I see it all the time, and it's not healthy, and it does not honor abuse victims who've been abused by their harm. And so, when I talk about weaponizing forgiveness, I'm talking about pressuring a victim to forgive quickly, right? Without proper grief or repentance from the perpetrator, misquoting Bible verses as a form of manipulation, which really is just spiritual bypassing. And you're getting, many times pastors, they try to get the victim to forgive. So from the study, so many women said, we would go to our pastor, and, if it wasn't have more sex with him, the next question was, have you forgiven him? Making forgiveness the problem, right? So it's not his porn use or his pornographic mindset or his deception that he keeps lying about it. It's not that. It's about, have you forgiven him yet? Right? It's just this gaslighting of victims. And so then the pastor feels good because, in a sense, he's done his deed of helping them forgive. And so it's really about checking off a box that I've done my good pastor thing to do, rather than actually no, I actually am going to embody Jesus here and confront the Pharisees about just this ridiculous thing. And then we just move on, right? The highest priority is about moving on and not actually sitting with the brokenhearted and the betrayed.
So, and it sounds like that's what the women in your survey wanted, right? Like they don't want to be gaslit. Like they just want people to hear their stories, hear them out, and give it some credibility. And then I think you also said they would love to just have one other person who is there. Is that right? Who's there with them or who's there for them?
Yes. Yeah? They want representation.
Representation. Sorry, that's the word. Okay.
They want to be somebody else, so they're not alone in this.
Was there anything else that they were asking for, or anything else that they said, like, why is this normal in the church, or why do we do this, or this needs to happen more? Is there anything else like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so many of them literally going back to Jesus, like, could we just be like Jesus? Could we just be treated like Jesus treated women? Because I think Jesus should be the one that guides our churches, right? Yeah. And Jesus was all about the liberation of women. Look at John 4 and the woman at the well, right? The alabaster jar story, the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15, the Mary Magdalene in John 20, right? Jesus literally entrusts the most important part of our gospel, Christianity, the resurrection, to a woman. He says, preach, go tell the world about me. Yeah. And it's like, if we can just, even halfway look like Jesus did, I think we'll be doing just fine.
On the modesty front, you kind of mentioned earlier, like in the example with the two dads at the cottage and the daughter, and that she should be able to wear, whatever she wants and not have to worry about like doing it for, whatever, the protection or the purity of another guy. And it got me thinking about, like, my wife and I have always been very involved with worship teams. And we've had conversations around like dress for a worship team, because we've been on different churches and there's different rules and different expectations, and some of it gets communicated, some of it you just kind of get shamed for not doing what they wanted you to do, and then you have to figure out what you did wrong, and all that kind of stuff. What is there a line, like I guess, is there a pendulum swinging too far in the other direction of like, where it's like, it doesn't matter what you wear. Does environment matter? Like, I think I'm just trying to piece some of these other things together.
It goes right back to shadow. So let's say a woman is, cleavage down to her belly button. Okay. We're talking just ridiculous.
Sure.
Like, I would be so intrigued. Like, what is going on? Like, what's going on for you? What do you need here? Right? Like, there's a shadow at play. Something's playing out. She needs, most likely, some therapeutic help. Maybe not, right? Maybe it's just, I don't have any money to buy a full shirt. I have no idea. Right. But it's like, as a therapist, I want to sit with her and figure out, like, okay, what's at play here? What do you not seeing? What do you need? What does my gaze do for you? Right? What are you trying to get here? Like, there's something here at play. So in that, like, women have shadow too. Like, we all have stuff we have to deal with. And so our shadows are at play all the time. And so, as a therapist, I'd want to sit now in a public setting, like, you don't have time to do that work, or that's not your position in her life. And so that's all but what I always go back to is, that's the simple solution. Well, go put on more clothes. And we have for generations made it the woman's fault. And I am so tired of it. And I truly if you need to close your eyes or whatever, go for it. Worship God. But there's a reason why you continue to look and want to consume her. And it has nothing to do with her. Even if she's unhealthy, even if something's at play, I actually want to make your sin about you. Sorry.
Okay. So you would disagree with, like, mandating as a worship team, you can't wear XYZ, that kind of thing?
I would. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. And it comes back to the individual. It's like, if that's a problem for the individual, we got to figure out why.
Yeah. Like, I am all about, but again, who do I work with? I work with, abuse issues, deceptive sexuality and abuse. That's it. Right. That's my only thing that I do.
Yeah.
And so these men have to take radical responsibility, because for years, all they've been doing is pushing it on everybody else. They've been making it everybody else's fault. Yeah. And so I think the moment that you kind of begin to, legislate or dictate, I still think there's a sense where you're actually letting men off the hook for their own sin. It's an easy button. It's an easy button.
Yeah.
No, don't deal with it. Just cover her up. Just cover it up, right? It's like, wait a minute, wait. You're consuming beauty. You need to change your relationship with beauty. Hold up. Let's talk about this. Why do you go to a posture of devour rather than a posture of honor? What's going on for you? Why do you feel like you need to consume beauty and take it and penetrate it rather than sit with it and be with it and honor it and be in awe of beauty?
Yeah.
To me, those are the questions that we need to be asking that we're not asking. Yeah. Now, that's obviously, we're not going to do that on, every Sunday morning before worship service.
Yeah, fair. But I understand, though, like, there needs to be an ownership there, and guys being accountable at a much deeper degree than they have been in the church. So it makes a lot of sense. How do you guard your own heart? Like, you actually get a lot of traction on Facebook, which, for anyone who's in the content creation game, that's very hard to do these days. So you're doing something right over there, but your content, it is really good. I think you're telling some important stories, illustrating some of the points that you're trying to make. And I guess there's a lot of stories. And so that's where my head is going is, man, you heard a lot of interesting stories, probably doing the research. Obviously you hear a lot of stories in your office all the time, but what are you doing? How do you govern your own heart and protect yourself? And what are some of the self-care measures that you use at, your stage of the game and the level of education you have and everything else?
Self-care is very important. So I play a lot of pickleball.
Oh, nice. Okay, you hopped on the bandwagon.
That's my new thing.
Let's go.
And I get obsessed with things. And so, I've been obsessed with it for a little while, and now I'm doing tournaments, and I'm like, I got the bug. And then funny. I'm taking a lot of bubble baths. And I just totally zone out. And so it's just like, what do you need to do to have that balance of both I'm in these hard conversations and hearing these hard things. And if I ever can see myself trying to consume beauty or fantasize, it's just like, you have to realize there it is. Like, I'm not going to go down that road. Like, that's not a helpful train of thought for me. And I'm going to stop. right? Stop that. Or it speaks more to, okay, I'm not well. What do I need?
You mentioned, obviously, we talked about story work earlier, and that's a huge part of the process that you're taking your clients through. Huge part of your own process, obviously, along the way as well. What are your thoughts on, we talked about, like, for pastors, how great it would be if every pastor was doing their story work. What about for practitioners, people that are in positions where they're helping others with mental illness? Obviously, in our context, it's typically porn addiction or something similar. Like, how often are you doing your own story work? Is that just a normal part of your day-to-day life? Are there seasons where you do it pretty intensely and seasons where you're maybe not that focused on it? What does that part look like?
Yeah, it kind of ebbs and flows with my needs, but I know for myself, I always have to push myself further. And so there's always, what's my edge, right? So that's through my own writing. I'm always pushing myself, but also through my own groups where I'm not leading, where I'm actually, no, it's easier for me. I always tell my clients who are in the group, I'd much rather be in this seat than yours, right? Like, it's easy in a sense to be the leader of a
True.
group because I can
Yeah.
hide behind my position versus I'm putting myself in positions where I'm wildly uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
so we have to continue to push ourselves. We have to continue to face our own shadow, or we're not going to do the deep work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, you're an inspiration, man. I think the work you're doing is incredible. The book is called A Safe Church. If people want to find out more about the retreats and just anything else that you and Christy are up to, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can find us on www.christiancc.org, and we run the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma.
It's amazing. We'll put links in the show notes. Dr. Bauman, thanks for your time, man.
Thank you. Great being with you.